A house in Japan is worth $0 after 30 years. Not worth less, zero. The bank will not lend against it. The tax office writes it off completely. And when the last person who loved that house dies, the kids do not move in. They let it rot, because tearing it down costs more than the land underneath it is worth. Right now, there are more than 9 million of these empty houses scattered across the country, sitting in the rain, quietly falling apart. And here is the part that trips up almost every foreigner who moves to Japan. The apartments people are running to instead, the sleek new towers in Tokyo and Osaka, mostly do not have heaters built into the walls. No radiators, no vents pumping warm air through the hallway. People are walking away from big traditional homes with real yards and choosing tiny concrete boxes where you can see your own breath in January. That should not make sense. So let's figure out why it does. Start with the number that explains almost everything else. 32 years. That is the average lifespan of a house in Japan, according to national housing data. Compare that to 55 years in the United States and 77 years in the United Kingdom. A Japanese house is built, lived in, and then treated like a car. The moment it stops being new, it starts bleeding value, and by year 30, the structure itself is worth nothing at all on paper. Only the land underneath still counts. This is not an accident or a quirk. It is the entire national housing market working exactly as designed, and it goes back to a specific kind of post-war trauma. After the Second World War, entire cities had been burned to the ground. Millions of homes needed to go up fast, and fast meant cheap. Quality took a back seat to speed for decades, through the post-war boom and beyond. Then, in 1995 and again in 2011, massive earthquakes exposed exactly how flimsy a lot of that older housing stock really was. The 2011 quake alone leveled more than 130,000 homes and damaged over 1 million more. After that, seismic codes tightened again and again. So now there is a national assumption baked into the culture. Old equals unsafe. New equals safe. Nobody wants grandma's house. Everybody wants the one built to the newest code, with the newest steel reinforcement, on a plot where the ground has been tested. Here's where the abandonment problem actually starts. And it is rarely the story people expect. It is not that Japanese families do not love their homes. It is that loving a house here comes with a bill nobody wants to pay. Roughly 60% of these empty properties were simply inherited, and most of those became vacant the moment the original owner died. Picture it. An elderly parent passes away in a farmhouse 2 hours outside the city. Their children have lived in Tokyo apartments for 20 years, working office jobs, raising kids in a completely different world. They come back for the funeral, and now they own a 100-year-old wooden house full of a lifetime of belongings, including, often, a butsudan, the family altar holding the ancestral memorial tablets. You cannot just throw that away. You cannot just sell the house either, because clearing it out costs real money, demolishing it costs even more, and the land it sits on the outskirts of a shrinking town might be worth close to nothing. So the cheapest option, the one almost a third of these families actually choose, is to do nothing. Lock the door, let it sit, call it storage. And once ownership gets tangled between multiple heirs, the paralysis compounds. A house passed to 3 siblings, each of whom has children of their own, can end up legally owned by a dozen distant relatives within 2 generations, and getting all of them to agree on anything, sell it, fix it, tear it down becomes nearly impossible. For years, an estimated 30% of these vacant houses had unclear ownership. Japan only made inheritance registration mandatory in April of 2024, giving heirs 3 years to formally register a property or face penalties. Specifically because this problem had gotten so bad, the government had to force people's hands. Meanwhile, the country is emptying out underneath all of it. Japan's population peaked back in 2008 and has been sliding ever since. And it is aging as it shrinks. Nearly 30% of the population is now 65 or older, roughly 3 times the global average. Rural towns are losing residents every single year, while young people funnel into a handful of major cities for work. So even a well-kept, structurally sound countryside house runs into the same wall. There is simply nobody left nearby who wants to live in it. There is also a quieter, less talked about push factor working in the same direction. Holding on to an empty house in Japan is not free. Owners still owe an annual fixed asset tax, typically somewhere between roughly $200 and $1,000 a year, depending on the assessed value, plus insurance, plus basic upkeep to stop the roof from caving in. For decades, Japanese tax law also gave a discount on that property tax as long as a residential building was still standing on the land. Which sounds helpful, except it accidentally rewarded people for leaving a crumbling structure up rather than tearing it down, since bulldozing the house could make the tax bill jump. Regulators have been tightening that loophole in recent years, letting municipalities strip the discount from houses that are officially neglected. But for a long time, the incentives quietly told people the opposite of what common sense would suggest. Do nothing and the tax stays low. Fix it up or knock it down and the bill goes up. So people did nothing for years, sometimes for decades, until the walls started leaning and the roof started sagging into the next lot over. Now here's the turn, because none of that fully explains why someone would choose a freezing apartment over a warm house that might come for free. Say you are 30 years old, working in Osaka. You could inherit your grandfather's farmhouse for nothing, or buy a nearly new one for a fraction of what it would cost anywhere in the West. But a 100-year-old wooden house means squat toilets instead of a proper bathroom, thin aluminium window frames that sweat with condensation, walls with barely any insulation behind them, and renovation costs that can run into the millions of yen just to bring the wiring and plumbing up to a livable, code-compliant standard. Add earthquake retrofitting and you are easily looking at tens of thousands of dollars on top of a place you got for free. Compare that to a brand new studio apartment near a train station. Smaller, yes. Colder in January, yes. But it comes with modern wiring, a functioning kitchen, current earthquake engineering, and a train line that gets you to work in 20 minutes instead of 2 hours. For someone building an actual career, that trade is not close. You can actually watch this trade play out through real people. Sam King, originally from the UK, and his wife Nanami, who grew up in Tokyo, bought an Akia in a rural mountain area for around $100,000 and now live there with their infant son. King has said it would have been a lot easier and more straightforward to just buy something newly built. He also said something that gets at the other side of this, that it is such a beautiful house and it feels good to preserve it and extend its life. So this is not purely a financial calculation for everyone. Some people do it anyway, eyes open, budget blown, because the alternative felt hollow to them. Then there is Anton Vorman, a former model who moved to Japan in 2018 and bought an 11-room farmhouse for around $15,000. He spent tens of thousands more rebuilding it and eventually turned it into a rental that now books over $10,000 a month. He has since repeated that process on other properties. Stories like his are exactly why Akiya started trending on TikTok and YouTube in the first place, and why some viewers assume every abandoned Japanese house is a hidden gold mine. It usually is not. For every Werman story, there are hundreds of houses nobody will ever renovate, sitting on land and towns that are shrinking every year, worth so little that even giving them away does not solve the underlying problem. That is actually why some local governments got involved directly. Municipalities in shrinking regions started running what are called Akiya banks. Basically listings where a town will hand you a vacant house for next to nothing, sometimes completely free, as long as you commit to actually living in it. A few towns go even further and offer renovation subsidies on top. It sounds generous, and it is, but read the fine print and you will see why so many people still pass. A €0 purchase still comes with closing costs. And renovation on an old, poorly insulated wooden structure regularly runs into the equivalent of tens of thousands of dollars once you touch the plumbing, the wiring, and the earthquake bracing. You also inherit the ongoing property tax. And if you let the place fall apart instead of fixing it, the local government can now strip your tax benefits entirely and eventually bill you for a forced demolition. Free is the headline. It was never actually free. So why don't these new apartments just install central heating and fix the cold problem outright? This is the part that confuses newcomers the most. Japan gets brutally cold in winter in huge parts of the country, and yet whole house heating never became the standard, even in construction happening right now. Part of it is upfront cost. Retrofitting ducts, radiators, or underfloor systems into a building is expensive, and Japanese apartments are typically small, so heating 1 or 2 rooms directly with a portable heater, a kotatsu, or a wall unit air conditioner is simply cheaper than warming space nobody is standing in. A typical apartment's monthly heating bill running that way lands somewhere around 5 to 15,000 yen. Whole house systems in colder countries can run 2 to 3 times that. Part of it is climate design priority. Japanese summers are brutally humid, and mold is a serious, constant problem in a country this wet. So a huge amount of construction thinking has historically gone into keeping air moving and moisture out, not into sealing a building up tight, the way you would in Scandinavia or Canada. A tightly sealed, heavily insulated home fights the summer battle. Japan actually spends more of the year fighting. And there is one exception that proves the whole rule. Hokkaido, up in the frozen north, actually does build with proper insulation, double or triple glazed windows, and central heating as standard, because winters there are actually dangerous. The economics flip, and suddenly whole house heating stops being a luxury and starts being the obvious answer. Everywhere else, the math simply never got there. So you end up with a trade outsiders keep mistaking for a contradiction. People are not choosing cold over warm, they are choosing a functioning life, close to work, free of a 6-figure inherited liability, over an older house that would swallow their savings and still leave them 2 hours from the office. You put on another layer, angle a space heater at your feet under the kotatsu table, and get on with life, in a country where this apartment will also be considered old in 30 years. And the cycle starts over again. Would you take the free house if it meant tearing your life apart to fix it? Or the tiny, cold apartment that just works?